so much of like modern narrative gets imagined like a chain, one thing links to the next, whereas this is much more like the imagining of narrative as like winding old house.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on? We are the podcast where we throw open the gates to anime, where we deep dive into the classic, as well as bring you the best new anime. Ever wanted to get into anime but didn't know where to start? Then we are the podcast for you. I, as always, am your host, Sam, and I am joined, of course, by Charlie. Charlie, how are you today?
Hello, I'm good. Excited to be here once again. Excited to introduce our very special guest, who is, of course, Gerald.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, Gerald has returned to us again, and maybe for the last time in a little while. Gerald's about to embark on a very large journey of his own, about to head off overseas to live. Very exciting, Gerald, very exciting. And of course, before you head to the United States, we had to have you back in to talk about a show that is one of my most favorites. But before we do that, if you do like what we're doing, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, where hopefully you're watching this episode. Otherwise, if you're just a listener, you can, of course, find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. But if you want to give us a little 5 stars on Spotify and or leave us a review on Apple, really does make a big difference. If you also really like what we're doing, you can find us over on Patreon. That's right. We have a wonderful little community over there. Obviously, we are an entirely self-funded small group, and we do this all in our spare time as well as our jobs. So every little bit does help. Head over there if you really like what we're doing to help us out. Anyway, so now the spiel's over. Gerald, we've got you in here to talk about one of my all-time favorite shows. And I talked about this back on the show before we were ever on YouTube, before we really knew what the hell we were doing, before we had decent microphones or I knew how to edit. And I spoke about Naoki Urasawa's Monster. So Gerald, you have literally just finished watching it as we speak.
I honestly, 5 minutes ago. So normally, I like to think things through, have a bit of a watch, have a think, have a consider. This time it's just raw reaction.
Hot takes.
Because before, and I may have told this story on here once before, but before there was a gateway to anime, my personal gateway to anime was just calling Sam and Charlie and being like, what anime should I be watching? And so whether it's Fruit Basket or Legends of the Galactic Heroes, there's just been stuff that you guys have put on my radar that I've then like taken way too long to watch. Haikyuu is a great example of you calling and being like, Gerald, there's this show about a boys volleyball team. Like, I'm going to stop you right there because I'm a busy guy. But Monster was one that you had put on my radar like years ago and had seen it around. Netflix picked it up. And it was like on the edge of my periphery always to be like, okay, this is the one that I've got to watch. Put it off. You call about this. Now, this is a 74 episode TV show. Remember when shows were like 74 episodes and it was amazing? And let's just say I left my homework a little bit to the last minute. And this is why we're in this predicament now. But no, so thrilled to talk about it. I'm so glad you put me onto it. Just to, not bury the lead. It is a banger. And I don't think enough people have seen it.
So before we go any further, I just want to do a quick shout out to the fact that we are going to be appearing at Mechafest at ACMI in Melbourne, second weekend of May. We're going to be there on Saturday the 10th, doing a live episode from their cinema. We're going to be talking about the history of mecha and robots in anime. It's going to be so much fun. The whole event is just going to be absolutely outstanding. It runs from the 8th till the 12th at ACMI in Fed Square in Melbourne. If you're in Melbourne, come along, check it out, and we'll be releasing the episode very shortly after we record it. Can't wait to see you all there and or bring you this episode. Catch you there. So Gerald has appeared on this show numerous times. We, of course, did a deep dive into Neon Genesis Evangelion with you. We did Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. We also did Dark Fantasy with you. And, of course, we did a show slightly clickbaity titled called The Best Two Shows You've Probably Never Seen, where you spoke about the aforementioned Fruits Basket and Legend of the Galactic Heroes. COVID times, we also tasked Gerald. Gerald's a watcher, a very impressive watcher, because you are, of course, a writer, a very, very talented writer, which is why I was heading off to the United States. And as a result, we do love hearing your opinions because they're always very considered. and very measured and very well thought out. But today, hot takes.
Just hot takes.
Hot off the presses, just come and seen 74 episodes of a show.
Yeah.
I'm excited. So before we dive in, Charlie, what's your experience with Monster?
Oh, it's a classic. And honestly, I was surprised when you mentioned that you just started watching it because I was like, seems like a real Gerald show. Like, it seems like one that
Gifted.
you would have told me to watch back in the day. You know, like it seems like one of the ones like Mushishi. And like there's a bunch that Gerald's actually told me to watch from when we were younger, you know, and the DVDs days. So I'm surprised that you weren't on top of it then. But I can see how those classics sometimes just get away from you. And the more people tell you to watch something, the less likely I am. I know that about myself. And then years later, I'll be like, oh shit, this is my full personality. Why did I live this long?
I also think this is a great parable for anime fans because how many of us are out there, like you get to a certain point and you wonder, have I watched everything that is good and I will like? And you start to lose hope that there is another like diamond in the rough. There always is. You just got to keep digging. You know?
Totally.
Always there.
I think it's funny to me that you had to binge watch Monster because it really, I think in terms of like animes are really, just in general as genre, anime, usually a good binge watch, you know? Like, oh, I'm feeling sick. I'm just going to watch like 95 episodes of some shonen. Monster's a little different from that. I'd say I wouldn't put it at the top of my bingeable series. Just tonally, it's a little bit distressing. My experience with Monster is it was always one of my favorites. Like, again, like I kind of got it to it a little bit later. I found it hard to get into originally because it is slower paced than what I'm used to with anime. But I think the payoff of it, and I think the fact that it is slower paced and it is different makes it its strong point.
Yes.
And you feel like you're watching like a Hitchcock TV anime, you know, like it's such great psychological thriller, so stylized. It made me want to read the manga, you know, which I know is obviously a classic and people say the manga is the greatest thing ever written. Still haven't done that, so that's next on my list.
What's right behind you there, Charlie?
I'll just take a few seconds, guys. If you don't mind, I'll just have a read.
Just have a flip through.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Obviously, it's famous. I think there's a couple of things people know about Monster despite never probably seeing it. And this is something that was all across my desk. What am I talking about? It was like Johan, best anime villain. We know that like there's two shows that you go best anime villains of all time. One's Berserk, one is Monster. And those two are like
They're iconic, yeah.
the iconic villains. And so I watched it being like, where's this Johan at? Like you got a lot to bring to the table, mate. You got such a big reputation. And let's just say he does.
He brings it.
Is a monstrous character.
Brings
I
the
would say.
thunder. So before I talk about the author, Naoki Urasawa, Gerald, why don't you tell people what Monster is about for those who haven't seen it or for those who haven't watched it for a long time and need their memory jogged?
So the what of Monster is that there is this brilliant Japanese neurosurgeon who is living and working in Germany in kind of a Cold War period. The Berlin Wall has just fallen. And he is a superstar, #1 surgeon in Germany. He's got life on a string. He's about to marry the director's daughter. He's like going to be a head of surgery really soon. But kind of the one wrinkle is that this hospital is a little bit profit-centered. One day, this Turkish woman comes in and is upset that instead of doing surgery on her husband, he was pulled off to do surgery on a famous, higher, more important client for the hospital. And so this bothers him a little bit. And it's relevant because on one stormy evening, 2 twins are rushed into his hospital. And the little boy has been shot in the head. And his boss is trying to pull him off to work on the mare. And so he has a moral quandary. What does he do? He decides, at great risk to his career, to operate and save this young boy. And so at this point, you're like, why is this called Monster? Where is the twist here? How is this a thriller? Well, it turns out that the little boy that he saves is grows up to be the eponymous monster, one of the most horrific serial killers ever put to fiction. And the story follows this neurosurgeon so racked with guilt and shame about his decision as he tracks Johan across Cold War Europe, trying to set things right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is an extraordinary story. And again, obviously it's a seinen, of course. So that means obviously aimed at older male audience predominantly, but of course it's not just for males, but it is at an older audience, an older demographic. And you can really see that because this show to me, it's very adult, you know, and it's something which deals with very heavy, interesting themes, especially to do with the nature of what it is to be human, the psychology of humanity, and especially to do with that post-war time There's a lot to do with like how children were sent off to, these experimental orphanages where they were experimented on psychologically, sort of coming off that Nazism time. And there's a lot of that the Stasi, and there's a whole lot of like sort of private police and, not creating super soldiers per se, but in that realm, trying to create Johann. There's a reason he is like this, right? There's a big conspiracy which goes all the way, through Europe and through multiple shady government organizations. And the rich cast of characters is what really makes this show so extraordinary, and the bold narrative choices that Urasawa makes, I think. And we'll cover that in a little bit, because not only does Johann turn into a monster, basically Satan himself in many ways, the devil, he also decides to really fuck with Tenma's life too. Nothing to add to the synopsis there is that after Tenma saves Johann, his life falls apart. His fiancée leaves him. The chief of medicine sidelines him, thinks he's a fucking fool, a naive clown, basically. And he's stuck in a sort of dead-end position at the job, despite being the most talented surgeon in the country. And all of a sudden, the director of medicine and another very high-profile person die. And turns out it is Johann come back, but it's not just him trying to help Tenma, which you kind of think it might be at the start. It's all part of a very elaborate, very sophisticated, twisted game that Johann is playing with Tenma because he saved his life. It's very messed up. It's so cool. It's such a great show.
Yeah, just psychologically very riveting on all fronts.
And of course, the other thing to note is that after Tenma's life falls apart and Johann essentially kills those people, and not just to help him, Tenma ends up on the run himself. So it's very much a fugitive type story with Tenma phasing in and out of the story sometimes, but that is part of the main narrative device is Tenma on the run, on the hunt, while also being hunted. It's a very interesting way to tell the story, and it works incredibly well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is it's just a fairly unique anime, I would say. In a style that, like, I would say we're gateway to anime. I would say this is a very good one for people who just like psychological thrillers. I think it will appeal to any fan of thriller, but not necessarily anime. Like, it kind of, to me, feels more like a regular TV show than an anime per se. I know there's some extra bits, like the fire and all. Like, there's some anime elements.
Of course.
You've got your detective doing the typing and,
It's a good segue into Urasawa, because that's one of the things I was going to bring up. I'm not sure that he's interested in writing traditional Japanese manga or traditional Japanese anime. It's always interesting when the West picks up elements of the East, and that finds its way into popular culture. But this is such an example of when the West ends up in the East, and there's so much of like 90s Hollywood and 90s Western popular culture that finds its way into this and is transformed through his voice in really interesting ways.
I was reading about how his editor and publisher, they didn't want him to write it because they were just like, this is not going to be popular. Like, no one wants to read this manga. So he ended up writing a thing about women's judo. Did you read this?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I find interesting. And apparently that was also great, which I don't doubt.
Classic
but
Urasawa.
I feel like he just kind of, went like, I think, as I was saying, it's just such a different kind of style and not something you would assume, and obviously has no interest in he wants to explore those Western tropes within, or not tropes. Tropes is the wrong word, you know what I mean? Style of writing.
Yeah. No, he has got a lot of transnational elements to his writing, which makes him quite fascinating. So I'll just quickly give you a little background on the author Urasawa, because not only has he written Monster, he also wrote Pluto and 20th Century Boys, amongst many other things. He is an absolute cornerstone of the anime industry and is one of the modern legends of the medium. In fact, Bong Joon-ho, from Parasite, of course, the South Korean director, stated that he believes Naoki Urasawa to be the greatest storyteller of our generation. It's a huge quote. And that's factual. It's factual. It's insane. So that's the level we're dealing with here and why it's so good. So Naoki Urasawa. So initially he was heavily inspired by, of course, Osamu Tezuka, which is, of course, why he did Pluto later on down the line. And his first experience was through Astro Boy. That was his first as a 4 or 5-year-old. And especially the 2 arcs that really, really inspired him were The Greatest Robot on Earth and The Artificial Sun, which was actually what he ended up sort of turning Pluto into a bit later. As far as like adult sophisticated manga is concerned, you really can't go past Urasawa. He's pretty much
Yeah.
top of the tree. Yeah. So interesting, he started drawing manga young, but saw the gap between himself and someone like Tezuka. He thought he would never be a real manga artist. He's also quoted as saying he could tell when a manga was commercialized and made with the sole purpose of making money, something he was just not interested in doing. Hence why he wrote something like Monster, and his his producers and publishers are like, dude, no one wants to read that. He's like, I don't care.
Why are you doing this to us?
Yeah, respect to the man. He basically never thought he was going to be a manga artist. Didn't think he had it in him. Didn't think it was something in his reality. So he graduated from Massey University with an economics degree.
Wow.
After graduating, Urasawa applied for a job at Shakokukan, which is a publishing house, big publishing house, not just for manga and light novels, but like for many, many things, but mostly manga and light novels and whatnot. He applied for a business role. Yeah, I'm not sure which, doesn't matter. And he actually just brought along some of his manga, just as a kind of maybe an icebreaker or just for interest's sake, because he was still drawing it in his spare time, but he wasn't pursuing it
Sure.
properly, right? Also, the Shokukugan was founded by Shueisha, who is the biggest manga publisher in the country.
I see.
Basically, he decided to bring it with him, and he showed it to the boss, and then just this sucks, and just gave it no heed. However, the editor of Big Comic Original happened to be walking past, poked his head in, and was like, not bad at all. Brought him down to Big Comic, which does a lot more seinen-y type stuff. And basically gave him a little gig. Took him to the editorial department, and he ended up submitting his unpublished work called Return in 1982 to the New Manga Artist Award, and he won. And after he won, it just gave him the confidence to be like, hey, that thing that I thought I couldn't do, maybe I can. Maybe I'm not going to be an economist after all. And this is when, not long after that, he met his longtime collaborator, Takashi Nagasaki, who has basically been his co-writer and collaborator, editor for a very, very long time. Worked on Monster, worked on Pluto, all sorts of things with him. So he then worked as an illustrator for several projects, but his first project as a writer and illustrator was Yawara, which was released in Big Comic Spirits in 1986. This won him his first Shakukogan Award in the general category, and it was adapted into an anime and live-action film, and actually finished up in 1993. So also just interesting about Urasawa, because he's insane, he almost always makes two shows at once, or writes two mangas at once, almost always. So I'll give you a little, I'll just quickly go through some of his works so you know, but also listen to the dates because there are crossovers. And when you hear this, you're like, you're a psycho. How do you do this? So he illustrated Master Keaton, which a guy called Hokusai Katsushika wrote it. And it was an anime and an OVA. That was from 1988 to 1994. In 1993 to 1999, he created and made Happy, tennis show about a girl who basically becomes a pro tennis player to help pay off her brother's Yakuza debts.
Cool. Sign me up.
So
It's a
I was
good
like,
way to pay off some debts.
1994, so over the same period, 1994 to 2001, did Monster. 1999 to 2006, 20th Century Boys. So he was making Monster and 20th Century Boys at the same time. That's wild. 2003 to 2009, Pluto. So he's making 20th Century Boys and Pluto at the same time. Then he did a show called Billy Bat in 2008. And in 2018, he's still making a show called Asadora, which is still going on.
Do you think creatively that's like a technique people will sometimes be like, you get to, if you stuck with just one project, you kind of get too bogged down. If you go to something else, then you can come back to it. Do you think that's a valid, I don't know.
But especially if they're releasing like monthly.
Yeah.
That's pretty insane.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how is he doing that? That's crazy shit. I don't know. That kind of blew my mind with him, right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
can't
it's
do
a
one
wild
thing
thing
at a
to
time.
do. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's Urasawa. I just wanted to kind of get in there. So let's talk about the anime adaptation of Monster. Because obviously it's made by Madhouse. And this is Madhouse at their peak, right? And Madhouse that also made Master Keaton, which is the show I mentioned before. Also crazy synopsis. So interesting. So is Billy Bat, by the way. Billy Bat's like, this guy was in occupied Japan, goes off, writes this amazing story about this talking bat, realizes that he's actually kind of stolen it from his time in Japan, goes back to Japan to try and find the guy because he was inspired by an illustration, which he then basically stole, goes back, and then it turns into this huge, like, psychological sort of cosmic thriller thing. I'm like, Urasawa, You're good, man. You know what you're doing, dude. There's some crazy stories in here. I got to watch or read Billy Bat. Anyway, Madhouse, 2004 to 2005. And it was, of course, screenlit by Masao Maruyama, who at that point was head of Madhouse. He, of course, then went on to found Mappa, now has Studio M2, which did Pluto just a couple of years ago.
Of course.
Specifically chose to do that because this guy gave Urasawa his go. And he started it with Master Keaton. A lot of the team who worked on the Monster adaptation did Master Keaton. And as a result, the adaptation is pretty extraordinary. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful adaptation. It's like, what I like about Urasawa's art, it's not afraid to be a little bit ugly.
Definitely unique.
Very unique. Hard lines, kind of not afraid to draw, like, for example, Lunge, who is one of my favorite characters in the show, is just drawn with such a long, droopy sort of nose, but really sharp features. Like he's got the widow's peak, which is like too sharp. Of course, his ex-partner is almost drawn much of the time, despite being a beautiful woman, is often looking to be grotesque because when it shows her one of the monstrous side of her personality. It's so good, but also
a lot of jowls, a lot of
yes,
big,
yeah. Then of course you got Johan, who's just stunningly beautiful, right? This kind of like ethereal, otherworldly, devilish beauty. You know, it's so interesting. So it's directed by Masayuki Kojima, who did Master Keaton, and then later Made in Abyss and Commander Citrus. Written by Tatsuhiko Urahata. Now, of course, he mostly just adapted the manga, of course, but he wrote Master Keaton, Violet Evergarden, and Nana.
Good stuff.
And Madhouse. Character designs were by longtime Studio Ghibli animator Kitaro Kosaku. And the music was by Kuniaki Hashima, which is, the music in Monster is so good. It is so incredibly good.
Yeah, definitely one of the things we gotta touch on.
We will get in on. And then, of course, interestingly, the opening was by a guy called David Sylvian, who was from the band called Japan. You know, in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s. He was commissioned to write the first ending song. So no, sorry, I lied. Hashima wrote the opening, Grain, and then he wrote the ending. Also, in the cover notes to the official soundtrack, he is quoted, "I was attracted to the Monster material by the moral dilemma faced by its central character. The calm surface of the music giving way to darker undercurrents, signifying the conscience of the lead protagonist, and the themes of morality, fate, resignation, and free will." I think that covers it pretty well. So let's talk about the characters, because obviously Dr. Tenma. Gerald, let's talk about Dr. Tenma, because I know you had a special affinity towards him, because it's interesting. You often don't like passive protagonists, and often he's passive. So let's talk about that.
I think like partner to the characterization thing with Monster is the way, firstly to say there's a lot of characters.
Yeah.
Secondly, to say that the way that it achieves such like a breadth of characterization and deep characterization is that it's not afraid to shift up POV.
Yes.
It's not afraid to be like, well, you followed Dr. Tenma for 3 episodes, but now we're switching over to this other person's POV, and you don't know who they are, what they're doing, how it connects, but just have faith that the road is gonna lead.
Mm-hmm.
And so like so much of like modern narrative gets imagined like a chain, you know, one thing links to the next, whereas this is much more like the imagining of narrative as like winding old house. And Urasawa takes you through the front door and you're like, oh, I'm on this like central corridor that is Dr. Tenma's story, only for him to open a side door, take you into another room, show you around that, then back to the central bit, then back to another room. And so it just creates this sprawling and very wide and deep character web. And so as kind of the central corridor of that, the pillar upon which all of these other branches happen, Dr. Tenma is this like very fascinating character. And so he is like starts as being like the seminal good boy, you know, just like I'm a doctor trying to save the world and, you know, do good by my patients. And even though like it's about as cheesy as it can get, it's so effective because you really buy it from this guy. He's just a total sweetheart and the absolute worst person in the world for what is about to happen to.
But he's got a central premise that is simple in that when he decides, you know, when he doesn't go and operate on the woman's husband, he just has a simple line, which when you think about the Hippocratic Oath makes sense. All lives are equal. That's essentially his modus operandi. And then of course his potential father-in-law does not agree. He said, no, all human lives are not equal. That is a falsity and foolishness and naivety, which is, of course, what brings him undone. But then because that is his guiding star, to go through what he goes through is so fascinating because essentially he needs to go on a journey to kill, to make right what he has done wrong, which is saving the devil. And then he has to try and figure out how to stop this person without killing him. But then it's like, but he needs to kill him. Oh, it's so fascinating.
And it's kind of like Johann, he's given everything to this belief that all lives are equal. And it's like humanist perspective that no, we can't let class or race or anything get in the way of the doctor's oath. And in a lot of ways, what Johann is trying to push him psychologically with is clearly in bringing me back. Have you not realized yet that that might not be true? And yet he holds. And so I think what makes Tenma such a fascinating character in Urasawa's hands is his journey is long. Charlie, you touched on it before, like the pacing of this is slow. It's not like there's 4 set pieces and Tenma's journey is over. Like this guy goes through the ringer, like over 74 episodes, my guy. He just goes from being this fresh-faced, neat haircut neurosurgeon to this hollow-eyed, beaten down, broken, morally ambiguous, still tortured and wrestling figure. And I think what makes the show so interesting in the way that he uses Tenma is that, like, in the first bit of the show, Johann's this ghost, and he's this like ethereal figure that Tenma's trying to catch up with. But as the story goes on, as this like this narrative house that you're being taken through gets bigger, Tenma becomes the mythic figure. Tenma becomes the person that this other character has picked up a thread of it, and then who is around the corner? Well, there's our guy, and he's looking even heavier, and even like more tortured. And you just by the end are just so compelled by his moral and psychological quandaries. It's just, it's truly very affecting.
It's very, very clever. And then of course we have who I did in a video on our YouTube channel where I did my top 3 antagonists. And one of them is, in course, Inspector Lunge. I think Lunge is such a fascinating character. As you mentioned before, the typing. He has a mnemonic device which he uses for himself where when he's taking down information, his hand starts moving as if typing, because he's essentially typing into his own brain computer. Well, computers were invented. Well, they're around, but only the 10 richest kings in the world could afford them. And he's typing on his computer, and he's so very much sort of an Inspector Javert type character, like completely obsessed with finding Tenma. And to the point where I love this sequence when he's like just so obsessed with work, going home, coming back, going home, coming back. And then he comes home and his wife and daughter have packed their bags and are leaving. And they're like, did you even notice? The daughter's like, did you even notice that I was pregnant? And this is the most perceptive man in the world. His wife, did you even notice that I'm basically fucking someone else? He just stands there, looks at them dead-eyed, gets a phone call about the case, answers it, says to them, I'll be back. You can tell me your explanations later, and walks out the door. It's like, it's such a good like examination of this like bloody-minded lunatic. Not lunatic necessarily, but like in some ways, he's a very frustrating character in some ways because he's so rigid and just cannot believe. And I love that sequence when it's juxtaposed with him and Tenma looking in the mirror in the crime scene, being like, I am Tenma. I am Tenma. And Tenma's trying to be like, I am Johann. And they're like trying to get into the mind of them. Yeah. And it's and then how his journey changes and how, without spoiling anything towards the end, he realizes his worldview was all wrong and accepts it slowly. Again, it's slow and methodical is this piece, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah, like he's such a great study in this brilliant character that sees everything and nothing.
Yes.
Like the family's a great example. But in the context of that A-plot, in the context of Tenma's case, like what happens when a guy that has never been wrong in his life and is almost like the picture of the rational, methodical mind who, using that rational, methodical process, can get in the mind of people because people make sense and things make sense. Mm-hmm. What happens when that character collides across the most outlandish, twisted, something that should only exist in fairy tales but's happening in real life? How does that character cope? Mm-hmm. Not well, and in a really like compellingly not well way.
Yeah.
Right up until, without spoiling, a very like satisfying ending.
Wonderful ending. Yeah. Such a great character. And of course, we must talk about the twin sister of the eponymous monster, Nina. I mean, she gets a rough run. It's a rough run of it.
Everyone has an awful time. You know,
Yeah.
like no one comes out of this unscathed.
It's a real tough time.
No one's good.
Just to touch on like Charlie being like, was this a rough watch back to back? Like it was, you know, like I watched 20 minutes of the most depressing thing. Take a breath. Click next. Be like, gotta finish it. I told them I would. Just tears streaming. And yeah, Nina has a tough time. What can you remember about Nina, Charlie?
Honestly, so it's been a while since I've actually watched Monster entirely, and it's not one that I rewatch very often for reasons that I'm like, oh, let's do that. Let's feel bad. Remember I tried to like watch it again during COVID, and I was like, this is already a bad. Like I was like, I can't right now.
do this.
Like, Nina. So I remember being like, obviously. She's a tough one because you kind of, out of all the characters, I feel like you want to kind of root for her the most.
You do.
You're kind of like, wow, like you really drew the short straw in terms of like, and she's really nearly got her life back on track, you know?
Nearly.
She's made these steps and you realize it's actually a lie and that her psychological damage is so like, anyway, it's good. I love the scene, like just, there's, I don't know, I can't really say much about it to be honest with you, other than I think she's had a tough time.
Yeah, but just because she's a mirror reflection of Johan, and there's a lot of like, Johan also will cross-dress as her, and there's this other joke of like he's my other self, and of course you have the story of the monster with no name. So there's obviously a fairy tale which keeps, and a lot of this story leans on fairy tale and the concept of names and having a name or being nameless. And there is a character who I won't name because it will be a spoiler, but there's a line where he says humans can be anything. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like psychological experiments on these children essentially trying to make them into anything, you know, and that was Johan is sort of a product of that. Another character who's a product of that is my favorite character of the whole show, called Wolfgang Grimmer. Grimmer is an extraordinary character because when you first meet him, he's this very jovial, very friendly, very affable dude who seems to know a bit more than he should. But when he was being raised as a child in one of these experimental orphanages, they essentially tried to make him into the Hulk. So it's essentially a sort of idea where psychologically, like, he watches a show called The Magnificent Steiner, which is essentially the Hulk. And whenever he gets angry, he completely blacks out and goes berserk. And basically, we see him do that a few times in the show. And it's quite jarring because he's this very friendly man who can literally turn into a monster, right? Again, we're back to this theme of monsters, people being able to be anything. What is a person? How much can a person be changed through their environment and through their psychology? It's very, very
Who
fascinating.
is the real monster?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the real question.
I want to talk about Tenma really quickly because I remember a bit ashamed to say this. I remember I found him a deeply frustrating protagonist.
He is a frustrating protagonist.
And like, but it's because he is, I don't know, like, you're right. It's a fascinating character and what he goes through and how he kind of like comes to that conclusion and what he's always just coming up against these moral like dilemmas within himself. And he's like a good boy, you know, like he's not actually a bad person. I found I kind of was just like, go on, just do it. I don't know. I found myself being really like, what if you just shot him though? Like, I don't know, which is not right. And maybe my anime brain kicking in. I was like, what if Tenma just like kicked him and came in with a gun?
Man,
yeah,
you know,
like,
yeah.
What if we just blasted him?
yeah, that's kind of where my brain went. And then eventually when I accepted that wasn't what the show was that I was watching, there's like elements of that in there.
Yeah, I mean, there are sometimes in the library when you're like, shoot him!
Yeah.
Shoot him!
I want him to be like really OP, but actually, you know, his strength is that he's a really great surgeon. And that is it. You know, that's what he does. And he's not, you know, a great detective or a great or that great at reading people. That's the thing. He's not at all. He's trusting. He's gets himself, and you're kind of like, come on. But you know, I think that's how most people would be.
And it is interesting when I think you juxtapose him with Grimmer, who does come in as a sort of protagonist for a little bit of the story. Again, the POV switches to him for a little while, and he is someone who's very capable because he can literally go berserk and kill like 20 guys. You know, like which is what you sort of want Tenma to be able to do, but of course he can't because it would make no sense.
And it wouldn't work in the whole.
The whole story would fall apart. It'd be a very different show. So but I like that, like how Urasawa gives that to us through Grimmer for a little bit, and how their relationship works, and how Lunge and Grimmer get together later. It's
And when I first
math.
started watching it, I really was into like Death Note and things like that, and I thought it was going to be much more of an equal cat and mouse kind of game here. It's not really. And the thing is that then there's like it's kind of like not even about like there's several players in here, and as you say, the narrative just kind of is not like two people masterminds going up against each other trying to figure it out. Like it's really not that at all.
Much more, in a way, like more complex than that. And like if you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, I'm trying like this guy and he's what and there's how and there's orphanages and stuff. Like it's so difficult to talk about without spoiling it. So we're dancing around a lot of things. But what I would say is that there's 3 things at play that make this super compelling, connecting to what you're talking about here, Charlie, where one, it is just such a great mystery. If you liked Pluto, if you liked 20th Century Boys, he's just a master of the slow burn, compelling question. You're going to go through it. Each character carries some of that question. So we can almost can't tell you how cool these characters are without ruining the plot, which is a good thing. That's a sign of a great bit of writing. But third is as you're kind of touching on here, with Tenma, every character explores the question of what is it to be a monster, And so Tenma is such an interesting one because what if you took the best guy that ever lived and made him have to wrestle with killing someone? What will happen? And again, some of it is so frustrating because you're just be a monster, man, someone's got to stop him, take one for the team. But ultimately, and I felt as you did, I was just okay, maybe this could have finished 30 episodes earlier if, in fact, he had just, pulled the trigger. But in the treatment of that question, ultimately, so rewarding where he gets to, which, again, I won't spoil, but very, very fascinating arc.
I think the adaptation itself, the actual anime, one thing I think I love that they did, because obviously the manga is black and white, so it's not colored.
Oh, yes.
I think I love that the style of it is so muted in terms of the coloring, in terms of the music, very bleak. And we say it's a bleak show, and it doesn't, everyone looks a little bit grotesque, but it's kind of got this edge of realism, simplicity to it in terms of how it's animated.
Yes.
Yep.
And I think that works very well for the slow burn.
The other character who fascinates me is Tenma's ex-partner and the daughter of the head of medicine, Eva Heineman. And she, again, starts off as a monster.
Oh, yeah.
She's an interesting character. She sucks.
Yeah, when I started watching it, I was like, wait, is this the character everyone says is the greatest villain? And I was like, because she kind of is. I don't know.
This chick sucks. But again, she starts off as a monster and sort of goes in reverse to a lot of the others. And by the end, you really do understand her as a character. It's so, because again, you don't want to see that sort of that classic, witch-esque kind of rich girl princess trope, which you do see a lot of across all fiction, not just anime. But she starts off as that, the spoiled, entitled, narrow-minded, callous and cruel character who, once someone serves no purpose to her, she drops like a sack of shit, which she does to Tenma. And she keeps trying to mess with Tenma many, many times throughout the story. However, without spoiling anything again, the way that Urasawa handles her development is, I think, the character development of almost every primary character in this show. Maybe there are a couple too many characters who don't get that development, but the ones that do, it's some of the highest math I've ever seen, not just in manga and anime, but in storytelling. It's genius how well he handles these characters.
When she's not so at the start, you're kind of this is almost cartoony evil, even for anime, for her. And actually, though, she's not a one-dimensional character. Like you said, I think a lot of the story is about nature versus nurture.
Big time.
And for her, it's kind of what do you do when you're in this situation where you've been raised with this expectation, pretty much groomed to do this, she has no idea. And then, as you say, she kind of learns something. And then, it's a lot of conversations around that. And so she's not just left as here's the gold-digging wife. It's kind of oh, she's like this because she's a product of how she was raised and her father and all of that.
Which they all are.
Yes.
And there's there's those who fight against what they've been raised as.
Yeah.
And then there's someone like Roberto who completely embraces the darker side of himself and revels in it, has no issue with what he's doing and why he's doing it.
Yeah.
He's got his idea and he's just hell yeah.
I love that, sorry, Gerald. I love that, we're talking about how these characters are all kind of I was there's realistic in the way that they're presented in this big way, but Johan is obviously presented as this mythological,
yes.
I love what you're saying, how Tenma kind of ends up being in that position. And it's kind of, I love how that works because, Johan is this, he's a full, Like he may as well be Satan himself. You're kind of going like
sometimes you do wonder if he is actually human.
Yeah. And that works very well in contrast to everything which is very human about this show.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of that thing where every character is the most three-dimensional version of themselves, and then at the center of it is this like mythic, fabulistic figure of Johann that the closest analog I think I can give to the kind of character he is and the role that he plays is Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
I mean, that is like, and both Hannibal Lecter and Johann are like nuanced in their depictions of essentially psychopaths, emotionless, empathyless figures, but the story revolves around them and really leverages the moments that they appear versus using them to drive or expecting them to be anything other than they are.
Yes. Yes. It's so fascinating. It's just such, and unfortunately there was, in 2013, it was revealed that Guillermo del Toro and HBO were collaborating on a live action pilot based on Monster. The co-executive producer, Stephen Thompson, from Doctor Who and Sherlock, was writing the pilot and del Toro directing. But in 2015, del Toro stated in an interview that HBO had passed on the project and they were pitching to other studios. That's been 10 years. I don't think a studio has picked it up.
I was going to say at the start of this podcast, we should take a moment of silence just to mourn what I think could have been maybe one of the better like anime IPs to make into live action. I think it really
100%.
lends itself. However, I will say one thing that gave me pause then is I didn't realize it was going to be the Sherlock writer. And I just can see Lunge's fucking mind palace. I can just see like Sherlock, you know, when he's like, and there's like and have you seen that recently? Have you seen?
Not for a long time.
Okay, you need to look at it because it honestly looks like someone's parody. It's like the editing of Sherlock's mind palace is so funny, and he's like typing and like honestly, the thought of that happening. Maybe it's best that they passed it.
Maybe we dodged another bullet there.
Not saying this isn't a wonderful writer. I'm sure, like excellent. I love Sherlock, just for the record, but just worried about the mind palace.
Yep, fair enough. Fair enough.
But obviously, Del Toro, absolute genius. HBO, I feel like. That's a real shame. Someone will surely do it though. It lends itself.
It does lend itself to it, doesn't it? What do you reckon it might work?
Yeah, I mean, like, one of my favorite experiences watching the show was seeing so much of the West in it, and you can see where and how Urasawa has seen all of the seminal things in the 90s, and they find their way back into his project in like even better ways, you know? And so like I watch it and like I see The Jackal, I see Silence of the Lambs, I see The Fugitive, you know, you hear Depeche Mode, you know, there's like a little bit of Lynch in there. There's this character called The Baby that's like stepped straight out of Blue Velvet, and you're like, great. You know, so there's all of these, it's all this beautiful pastiche of like 90s Western psych thriller kind of tradition. And it would be so good to see that circle complete, back adapted in a HBO context or whatever. And it's one of those ones where you could never defend against a network exec being like, this Tenma fellow, does he have to be Japanese? But like beyond that, it's not like a cultural appropriation thing like it is. And this is speaking to the setting and to the time period, because the other amazing part of it is that Cold War, post-Berlin Wall falling period of history is so fascinating, and hadn't seen that in an anime context before.
No.
But and this is to yes and what you were saying before, Charlie, like if this is a show about the question, what is it to make a monster? And part of the answer is like psychological and about the emotional makeup of human beings. Another part of it is, as you say, the sociological framework in which people are developed and how society molds people, and the depth that this show goes to in terms of exploring the like fallout of these communist authoritarian states is really, really fascinating.
It really
if you're
is.
into the Czechoslovakian secret police and legacies of you know, experiments to create the next golden age of communist leadership, it just like hits all of those buttons. You know?
So many people are begging for that. You know?
Yeah. But no, it's like a really fascinating historical piece, you know, in addition to just being a really incredible bit of storytelling.
Well, it is incredibly fascinating because obviously you've got, I mean, Japan and Germany were obviously on the same side in the war.
Yep.
And so it is interesting to have sort of the cross-cultural boundaries happening there in a post-Cold War context.
Yep.
It's really, really fascinating and something that doesn't get explored very much.
Apparently, so I was reading about how he decided to set it in Germany because apparently Japan, when like during the Meiji period, actually like modeled their health system, their medical system off Germany.
That's right.
So like it goes real far back with that, like, so I kind of was like, this is very interesting.
Yeah.
Like, and I guess like, you don't really associate Germany and Japan together in many ways. Are historically very much tied in with a lot of things that you wouldn't expect, such as the medical system from,
Well, I mean,
way
just
back when.
during the Meiji period, Japan literally, when they were modernizing, sent off some of their best people to all different parts of the world to be like, hey, go find out who does the best medical center, system. Go find out who builds the best weapons. Go find out who does the best university system. And then that's literally what they did. And obviously they decided that Germany had the best healthcare system and brought that back.
The other thing I want to like throw into the mix is it's a very stylish anime. And you
Very.
touched on it a little bit before with how it looks and the music, but it made me like very nostalgic for 90s anime.
Yes.
Very nostalgic. As much as I love my Demon Slayers, there's something about anime of that time period. I don't know if it just connects to when we started watching, but like that felt nostalgic and great. But between like how it looks, incredible music, there is also just this maybe as well leaning into this like genre driven it's like the Jackal, it's like Silence of the Lambs. There's a lot of really iconic images in this show that are just super effective and like images that I'll remember for the rest of my life. And there's one that really sticks with me, and you see like you see a round of Dr. Tenma halfway through his journey, haggard, really wrestling with having to kill Johan, and then he gets a sniper rifle, and it's just cool as hell, like,
and I'm like, finally.
Yeah. Well, that is a very frustrating moment. It's
Or it's like Lunge has been so composed the whole time, so like all internal, and then finally gets pushed over the edge, and it just these like iconic images. And so I guess like the point I'm laboring is that such care has been taken such that every kind of stylistic part of it goes together. I mean, the music as well, you touched on it a little bit. It's this like combination of kind of what feels like a Cold War-y, post-industrial, Depeche Mode kind of electronic vibe. But then also it's like Peter and the Wolf symphonic thing, and that merging between this idea of this European folk, which pops up in the music, but then also the iconography of the storybook that becomes thematically and plot relevant, but then also just like the realism of that like grungy post-Cold War period where everyone's like kind of doing it hard, and it just nails the clash between the ideal Europe and the historical real Europe, and that's really hard to do, and they just crush it.
It is such a good. For those of you who have gotten this far and haven't watched this show, please, you must watch Monster. It is just so good. And for those of you who have, hey, hit us up in the comments. Tell us what your favorite parts are, favorite characters, favorite moments. What speaks to you about either the anime or the manga? Because my God, it's so good to deep dive on a show like this because it deserves it.
Let's just talk about the pacing, because I think that's like a fair criticism, and I have to admit, like maybe it had a little bit to do with me. Just like chomping down 74 in like a period of like 4 days, but like it is slower than you expect, and slower than we've been conditioned to expect, and even like in the Western context, like it feels slower, and like I kind of lied. There was actually one time before this time that I tried to watch it, and the pacing had me falling off in the first 20 episodes. Push through. You're gonna feel like it's dragging a little bit. Go with it. It's worth it.
It will reward you, I promise.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard though. I feel like from my memories of the times I've watched it, it's like you feel like you're getting somewhere, and then suddenly the next episode will be like, who's this character? And it kind of like, you'll be like lots of false starts there, and then eventually it kind of converges together. I don't know. Like it kind of, you feel like it's going somewhere, and then it will be like 10 episodes with some guy on a train. And you're like, what's happening? Which is...
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a fair criticism. So I'm just hoping that we can leverage expectation versus reality to help some people like get through that. It's coming. It's not all Tenma's story. It's going to branch, but yeah, like it is when you're watching it cold, like you take some patience.
So I guess what I like to describe the show as a little bit is it's very much unpeeling an onion. It's like there's so many different layers, and it just keeps on getting. Every time you think you've got past the layer, there's another layer to come, and you're just like, my God, like, and it's a slow process, and sometimes your eyes get fucked. It's like, it's hard work, you're like, man, as you mentioned before, there is that very great change where it does flip protagonist completely. And you're like, huh? Who? And it's a completely different story. Like, seems to have nothing to do with anything that we've just been watching for the last 30 odd episodes.
But trust the process.
But trust the process if basketball has taught us anything.
I also think that this show has a level of cold and clinicalness to it. You know, it's like there's not, I would say there's not really like a shred of warmth in this show. There is like in certain moments, but like you really get hit with like, you got someone, I feel like Tenma's fighting for like a shred of warmth. And it's just like raining all the time. People, it's a lot.
And every time something good happens, it kind of just raises the jeopardy of like, what if it now gets taken away? Because this is a world where the light gets snuffed out quick.
100%.
And honestly, it's one of the it's a classic anime thing though. When things go well for characters, you're like, oh no, oh here we go. Yeah,
that's like I don't know, like as a final pitch, it is just such a beautiful anomaly. You know, where you've got this like Japanese master storyteller telling this Cold War story, referencing like Western 90s thrillers and psych thrillers. It's such a strange thing that I'm just so happy exists. You know, there's this level of anime or anything that exists for me. It's like, oh gee, I'm just so happy this exists, because it should, like Naruto, I'm happy it exists, but I can understand how it came to be and how it exists within a genre thing. This is just like someone went rogue, they did them, and I'm so glad they did. You know,
it is extraordinary.
It's a beautiful, unique piece.
It is, and even to consider, like, also he obviously did Pluto at the same time, and of course, as you mentioned before, the huge influence of Astro Boy Tenma. Of course, Dr. Tenma is Mighty Atom's father, and he, of course, is in Pluto, but of course, gets his little namesake in Monster as well. His little throwback to how much Urasawa loves Tezuka, the god of manga himself. You know, and you can see how influenced he is by that. It's so cool. It's just such a good show. I love it so much, and like, it's just something that I think if you're into slower, if you like The Wire, you're gonna like this. You know, it's that slow, it's that serious. But if you're in that mode, and again, I wouldn't suggest watching it in 4 days, but if you do have a bit of time to take your time with a slow burn of a story, you will be so heavily rewarded. And I think it is one of it's always in my top 10. It's been in my top 10 since I watched it back in 2014. And I don't see it ever leaving my top 10 anime of all time, ever.
I'm going to go read and watch everything that Urasawa has done, for sure.
Yeah. The man. Well, anyway, Gerald, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Mate, it's been so good to have you back just before you head on over to the land of the free. How exciting. And
if there's any watchers or gateway people in LA that want to hang out, let me know.
Hit him up.
Meet friends. My anime watching is about to spike.
That's been great. Well, Charlie, Gerald, thank you so much. Of course, you can go find us over on Patreon if you like what we're doing. Also, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Please give us a little like and or 5-star review on Spotify and a review on Apple Podcasts. Really does help. But hey, thank you so much again, Jerry. Monster, Naoki Urasawa, one of the modern masters of manga. And what a story it is. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on it. And thank you for watching 74 episodes really fast.
Take your time, guys. Take
your time, as they say in Persona 5. So we'll catch you all next time. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.